IVM.
Hello and welcome to the 20th episode of Lit Nama. 20 whole episodes, and this one is so special for so many different reasons. Firstly, 20 episodes. I mean, we've come so far, we've had so many mind-blowing discussions, and just there's so much far to go from here, and it is so heartening to have you all by my side. And second, this episode features someone who I met almost 5 years ago when I was attending this literature festival in Mumbai, and I was super excited to listen to her session, and I ended up running into her in the washroom and being super startled. But she's just so amazing, humble and heartwarming as a person, and so inspiring, because in the 5 years that I've known her, she's gone on to do so many amazing things in life. She started with advertising, then she went to stand-up comedy, then she wrote a memoir of her own, then she went to the US where she wrote this Gotham Award-winning TV show where basically she critiques culture through the lens of a Desi immigrant, and of course it's an experience all in itself. Today with her, Litnama is sort of going global because we are looking at all of these spaces, these gendered spaces, not only in the country, but also questioning how they function internationally with this guest who is waiting for us on the other side of the break. Actor, writer, and just an amazing person all in all, Radhika Vaz.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Racheta.
We are from the Open Library Project and we host a podcast called Paperback.
Paperback is a podcast where we engage with stalwarts and experts from various industries, suggesting non-fiction titles that contributed to their journey in a big way.
We've had guests like Anjali Raina, Dr. Marcus Rani, Dr. Swati Lodha, Ambi Parmeswaran, Apurva Damani, and many more on our show Paperback. Find new episodes every Wednesday on IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi Radhika, welcome to Lit Mama. This conversation was supposed to happen so long ago. And I think this is a conversation that's been happening since I met you at the Tata Lit Fest in, I think it was 2016, 17. It was a really long time ago.
I feel like my book came out
I think-
in the end of 2016 or something, or 2015. I can't even remember now. It's all such a blur. And then for a few years, I went to lots and lots of lit fests, and then I haven't been for so long. So yeah, it has to have been 4 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. Do you miss Lit Fest though?
I kind of do, because I just feel like the people who come to lit fests, are, they're really engaged. They're a fairly engaged audience, and whether they know you as a writer or not doesn't even really matter. I think that whatever event they're at, they just seem to be they're just engaged with what's going on.
Yeah. It's so amusing because Litfest for me have always been this space where people get more accessible.
Yeah.
So like if I've read about you, if you've seen your work,
Yeah.
I can finally reach out to you in person and be like, hey, listen, I love your work.
Yeah.
Which is something that happened with us. And I've been following your work since comedy.
Right.
So for me, when your memoir came out, I was like, hey, this is fun.
Yeah.
And it was amusing. It was really amusing. But how did you start with comedy? Like you were in advertising before.
Yeah.
So how did you move to comedy and how did that journey go about?
So I feel like advertising is one of those industries actually that just has spawned so many performers and writers, you know what I mean? Because it is a communication industry. It's about communicating ideas, basically. So I have so many friends who are in advertising even now, but all have these like amazing side gigs that they're doing, which are performance related or writing related or whatever. I have so many friends from advertising who became directors or writers outside of advertising because, like I said, it's an industry about communication. So to me, that jump didn't feel like that far of a stretch.
Okay.
But I think for me, comedy itself, being a comedian or a comedy writer, that was not something that necessarily that wasn't something I thought I would like do, or I would focus on, because I guess I'm 47 now, so you can imagine that when I was growing up, there wasn't a comedy scene like that, like what we have
Correct.
now. Like today, for a 18-year-old or a 12-year-old or whatever it is, it's totally normal. But back when we were kids, or even in my 20s, there was Bollywood and there was MTV and Channel V and whatever. Like the VJs and the RJs were kind of our comedians, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
and that was it. But so yeah, so when I moved to New York is when I started doing improvisational comedy as like a hobby. And improv comedy is basically making stuff up as you go along. So it's not like stand up where you write your set and you memorize it more or less and then you can play with it on stage, but it's a set. It's called a set. And that means that it's a planned thing that you're going to do. Whereas in improv, you get a suggestion from an audience member, and you and your scene partners or whatever, you guys start making stuff up as you go along. And I joined, and I mean, I guess I took improv because I'm lazy, and I figured, oh, I don't have to write anything or learn any lines, or literally that entered my mind when I found out that I could take it as a class. And
Okay.
what I think made it stick for me was the first teacher that I ever got was a woman, and she was really I don't know, she was just this really cool person who had done a lot of different things and knew a lot of cool people and was so funny. And she was funny in a quick kind of way. It wasn't like, making jokes at people's expense. It was, as you were talking to her, she would just say things that were her observations, and she was just so quick and so funny. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I just want to be around her and around all these people who are around her. And that was really, for me, the reason I ended up being in comedy, was because I just liked the people so much. Um, Especially improvisers, I think. And also because she was a female, the kind of people that got drawn to her class were mainly either women or what I call female adjacent men, who were like really not,
Yeah.
you didn't get creeps. You didn't get guys who try and touch
I
you.
really like
It
that
didn't last
term.
long. Let's put it that way. If
Yeah.
a theater classes, and theater is a place for, it's a place for guys to try and like try their luck. It's just the way it is. But because it was run by a woman, and because she was so aware of what was going on around her and the sort of um, culture that she wanted to propagate, in fact, like she had a rule that, don't keep playing. Like she'd get mad if you played a dumb blonde, or a woman who didn't know stuff. And
Okay.
one of the things she would always say about improv is that you can only be successful in improv if you choose a character that actually knows. So you don't have to be a clever person, but you can't be the person who's like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen next. It's more like the sky is falling. Like any choice, make a choice and like stick with it. So I think her method of teaching and her aggression in that way was very fresh for me, And like I said, the people that she attracted and the people who ended up staying were either women or very female adjacent guys who absolutely treated women as equals, equally funny, equally capable, were glad to be around us, and like, vice versa. So it for me as a performer, a writer, a comedian, I got a lot of encouragement from that. So making the transition became that much easier because I was being encouraged by a really cool bunch of people.
That is so much fun because, okay, there are two or three things that I have taken away from this. Uh, One is the fact that the understanding of looking at people and observation is so central comedy that people think, like you said, like now it's easier for anybody to step up on stage and try their hand at comedy, which was not the case when you were entering the scene. But it's so weird because people think comedy is just making people laugh, but I think there's so much more work that goes into construction of jokes, observation and all of that is just so amusing how you need your brain to constantly work to be successful at comedy in a way.
Yeah, I mean, look, yeah, you got to make people laugh. That's the bottom line.
Correct.
And it's a very subjective thing. So, I can make maybe you laugh, but that doesn't mean I can make your dad laugh. Or I may be able to make your dad laugh, but it doesn't mean I'm going to make his friends laugh. You know what I mean? It's so subjective.
Correct.
It really is true that beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, because it's the same thing with what we find funny, what we find pretty, what we find ugly, what we find happy, sad. Everybody has a different viewpoint, right?
Right.
I definitely think that there is more to it always. And there are certain comedians that are just so smart and they transcend so many different boundaries. But even they have limitations, and even they may not be found funny by an average person sometimes. So I think the first thing that I always say with comedy is write what you find funny and what you think is what appeals to you. Because someone asked me this, they said that a lot of your content is so feminist in its sort of like slant, and is that something? How do you do that? And I said, it's not always the case. I mean, I definitely have content that's not necessarily, it wouldn't be called feminist. The only thing feminist about it is me. But there are definitely then aspects of my work that very much can be called feminist. But you can't think of that when you're doing it. So I always feel comedy should never be agenda driven. It should just be concept driven. So if you have an idea for something, or something strikes you as odd or surprising, that's a great place to start writing your material from. And you may not have one joke, about it, but you may have a thought that takes a couple of minutes to get through, but the way you express it physically and verbally is what people might find very funny. So comedy is all different things, right? It's one-liner jokes. It's mimicking other people, its voices and expressions. It's storytelling. It's so many different things. But like I said, I think to me, the most important thing for a comedy writer is to write without an agenda, and to write things that they themselves find funny and surprising.
So, like the thing that you said about not having an agenda is a little like it's a slippery slope to kind of handle as a writer, right? Because as people, as individuals, we have certain like we are certain political beings, we have certain ideologies that kind of seep into our daily lives. And right now we're living in times when the personal is political in nature. But that being said, I want to like kind of steer this to a very controversial question.
Yeah.
I've attended shows, sessions, talks where some artists, now this is not something that's contingent upon being a comedian, but just some artists do not like to use the tag like women X, so like women author, or like female author, or a female singer, or a female comedian. That being said, there are also people who use that. So it's like the entire racial argument that we have towards it, like who gets to use the term in what sense. So is this like a fence that people sit on, or can you exist on both the sides? As a quote unquote, like a lot of writing that happens around comedy, like a lot of theorization that happens around comedy, divides people into female comedians, while they never say that there's a male comedian to begin with. So it's always assumed that the male comedian lies at the center of the idea of comedy, and on the periphery lies a female comedian.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about this? Because this is something that confuses me as a person a lot.
Yeah. So just two things. I've actually made a note over here. You said something before, which was you said that to write without an agenda is such a slippery slope, because we all have our feelings towards different things, right? Whether it's community or religion or politics or sexuality or whatever it is. So you're absolutely right. And that was, that's so true. And you realize it when you start doing something new. So, for example, I think I've written comedy monologues now for a really long time. So for me, I'm able to do it without the agenda of feminism in my head. And I think that when I started writing, I just started writing from a particular place in my own self, which turned out to be feminist. And then I definitely went through a moment of like only focusing on that stuff. And then I realized I'm a feminist. I don't need to worry about that so much. I'll just write what I want. But then recently I've started trying to write for I've started trying to teach myself how to write scripts for short films or
Okay.
a feature, whatever. I'm trying to put myself through sort of like a self-taught kind of a program during the lockdown, and with the help of some friends who write. And it is so hard to keep my agenda at bay. It's totally there. Every time I write a line of dialogue, I'm like, oh my God, that sounds awful. And the reason it sounds awful is because it's so agenda driven. It's not character driven. It's not plot driven. It's not driven by any of the things it's supposed to be driven by. It's being driven by my agenda. And so you're absolutely right. It's a very slippery slope. It's very hard to do. But because I guess I've done comedy and I know that you don't want your agenda to come into it. You want your agenda to be like a light veil that you wear. You know what I mean? Not like a heavy coat, basically. So right now for me, when it comes to script writing, I think I'm wearing my agenda like a winter coat, and I want to be wearing it like a malmal kurta. And hopefully I'll get to that place at some stage, but that's not right now. So that was one thing that you
That's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah. Then the other thing you said just now was about female comedian. I was just reading. So I recently just became obsessed with this woman called Joni Mitchell, who's like I've always loved her music. I haven't known much about it. I've known all her hit songs or whatever, but she's a singer.
Okay.
She's a songwriter, and her music, her lyrics are like poetry, which I don't even really care for, but it's set to these very soulful tunes, and she's kind of this badass. She's in her 70s now, whatever, but she lived through Woodstock, and she's just this really cool chick, and all of her lyrics are just really amazing. So I've become kind of obsessed with her, and I do what I do when I'm obsessed is I listen to everything and I keep reading and reading and reading. And I think she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or something like that, like one of the greatest female songwriters ever. So she was asked the same question, like, how do you feel about that? And she said, the moment anyone puts female in front of whatever it is that they're calling you, right? Whether it's female comedian or in her case, it's female songwriter. She said they're basically saying that you're not as good as the men. You're in a different category. So I do find it offensive. Like, I'm not offended by it because I'm a comedian. I'm not really offended by a lot of things. But I do think that when people say that, we just need to change the culture. Like, we're in 2020. We don't say female doctor. Why are we saying female comedian or female writer, female editor, female directors? Like, why is the entertainment industry, which actually has been at the forefront in so many ways of the feminist movement, still in some ways so the opposite, So it's just one of those strange things. You have to be such a feminist to be in this industry because it's such a pain in the ass and it's so hard to be in and it's so male dominated. So you're obviously, pushing a boundary, but then within the industry, you're called a woman director or a female comedian or whatever. So yeah, it's a tough one. But you're right. But my opinion on that is it is insulting. It's actually not a cool thing to say. So yeah, hopefully we'll change that slowly.
Like, if I'm being very, very honest, this is a question that I've not asked a single person on the podcast till now because I was reserving it for you.
Okay.
I remember this conversation we had. It was so weird, right? So we were both, I think, waiting for a session at the Tata Lit Fest, and we were talking about this Chetan Bhagat session that was supposed to happen the next day.
Okay.
And we both told, like, you were going to attend it and stuff happened, you didn't make it, and I sat for that session. Like, I voluntarily chose to sit for a session I knew would make my blood boil. But I was like, hey, listen, we gotta give every author a chance. I
Right.
mean, if he has a big slot at a big venue, there might be something. There might be certain, like you just said, like the agenda that I have, maybe that I've been trained under as a literature student,
Yeah.
might be keeping me away from popular literature. So I
Sure.
want to just give it a shot. And I walk into the room, and people all over, and you know the crowd that comes to Tata
Yeah.
Lit Fest. And he asked a question. So, how many of you are feminists?
Huh.
And everybody just started looking around. And this was promotions for a book, like his first One Indian Girl. That was the book. And then he asked how many people are not a feminist, and three women raised their hands. And I was like, "What the hell?
Yeah.
What is happening?"
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, that's what the idea of feminism is so elitist. I'm like, hey, listen, I get it. I get what you're trying to say. But when you're sitting on a pedestal where you have the entire popular literature dancing on your tunes, you can't be the first person to say, like, call names at something that you don't comprehend as an artist. And on the same session, a few days later, like the next day, a few sessions later, there is a panel talking about why we need more female narratives in literature, which is so ironic because I was like, hey, there's only one person who can give me the exact anger measured into the response to this question, because this is something that has especially picked me off every time we talk about comedy as a genre in itself. Because I feel like, just like you said, like a lot of it lies in the artist as to how do you perceive the world, which influences your observations, which kind of seep into how you write.
Yeah.
But you see that now, luckily, there are more women coming up in the scene, which is a very, very welcome fact.
Yeah.
But the representation is still so meager. Like, you are relegated to talk about certain issues that you need to talk about as quote unquote feminists. And I just don't get it. Like, how would we go? Like, where are we going to go from there in an industry that says quote unquote that you try to make people laugh?
You know,
It is just
yeah. Okay, so I'm not sure I understand exactly the question, but like you just saying this thing about the Chetan Bhagat, whatever, about that panel,
Yeah.
the no, not the whatever the session. Did he say that feminism is elitist, or did one of the women who said they were not feminists, did they say it was elitist?
No. So Chetan Bhagat himself said. So basically, I asked him a question. Okay, I asked him, "You're saying that right now you've written a feminist book. I really, really appreciate that because
Right.
popular culture needs to understand and give space for certain narratives. So I
Yeah.
get it. But can you really label yourself as a feminist writer immediately after you've written a book that says "Beti hai to de varna katli,"
Yeah.
which was a quote, direct quote from Half Girlfriend.
Okay.
And then he just went like, yeah, you elitist. I was a college student back then.
Yeah.
Our college literally used to pay us to attend the Lit Fest. Like, they used to pay for our tickets to get to the Lit Fest and
Okay.
like for the paid sessions.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, listen, I am literally like, I look like a student. I am telling you, I am a student. And there is very little power that lies with a student who studies in a Mumbai university. Like, dude, I am on the opposite end of elitism. And then he's like, no, it is people like you who have gatekeeped. And I was like, hey,
Oh
you
my
can't learn
God,
like
what a
five
jackass!
words
Seriously,
from, yeah,
and to like pick on a college student. No, but I think I do believe, we've had so many conversations about this, about how, so, in the West, and we have an equivalent in India, in the West, they always say that, the white feminists, never, if you look at the feminist movement historically, they never took
yeah.
black women into consideration. So similarly, in India, we have had elitism in feminism, because
Most definitely,
right,
yeah.
because I think there's been casteism within feminists, right? Like, so upper
Most
caste
definitely.
feminists and have definitely reaped a lot more benefits without worrying so much about bringing up women from lower caste. So there's definitely been there's definitely that. So of course, if a woman turns around and tells me, "Look, you're an elitist because whatever," I can swallow that bitter pill, but not from
Yes,
Chetan
yeah.
Bhagat. I'm sorry, but anyway, the point, I think I do think
No,
that.
the point that I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so the reason why I brought that up is because not that I hate him or like I
Yeah.
wanted
No one
to
hates
like
him.
bitch about him, but the point being when somebody, especially male, sits in a very influential position in pop culture, like comedy right now is crossing borders like nobody's business. Like the same stand-up set that I have seen, say, even 2 years ago on my screen when it was brand new, is something that is on my father's WhatsApp group right now.
Yeah.
So it is kind of becoming very massy. But when you are looking at this same popular culture from a female lens, and you're like, hey, listen, your popular culture's idea is brilliant, but it does not represent me or people who look like me, speak like me, or feel like me. Where do you think the entire war actually begins?
See,
Like,
I think it's
where do we
ongoing.
stand?
No, I think it's ongoing, right? So, I mean, it's ongoing. It's never going to stop. So I feel like I started doing comedy in New York, and I got my ass handed to me because I was older, I was brown, and I was a female.
Right.
Now, then, okay, so that happened there. Then I came to Bombay. And even here, it was mostly guys who, you know, they weren't sexists or anything. I'm not saying that. But it was very much, there was Aditi Mittal, there was Niti Palta, there was Vasu, who and a few other people here and there, Anu Menon.
Correct.
Literally, I can name all the girls who were in the scene at the time, right? And now I can't. Like, there's that many women. Having said that, it's exactly like every other industry where the top layer is still male dominated, and yeah, and so a lot of the jobs and the gigs that are valuable tend to still continue to go to them. It is still hard for women, but that's only because look at the audience and what they want. So,
Right.
that's the war is going to continue. It's always going to be ongoing. I feel. I think women are going to be fighting and pushing and trying to make stuff happen for themselves and for other women for a very long time, whether it's comedy or anything else. So, in context to this, though, I was just WhatsApping with my friend Naveen Narona. So Naveen Narona is a comedian who's gay. He's out. He's an out gay comedian.
Yeah.
And
he also has a podcast on the same network that we're recording.
Oh, is that right? Okay, fine. So
Keeping It Queer is also an IBM
okay,
show.
Fine. Got it. That's. I didn't realize that. So Naveen and I were just WhatsApping because there's a new movie that's come out. Something Shubh Mangal.
Zyada Savdhan. Yeah.
It's about. Wait, I'm just checking my WhatsApps to see. Both of us.
It's called Shubh Mangal Zyada Savdhan. It has
correct.
Ayushmann Khurrana.
Yes. So I saw Naveen's texts, which were like bashing the movie. And saying, "Oh my God, how embarrassing! It's so bad." Blah blah blah. So I just wrote to him and said, "What is this movie? Please tell me the name because I don't even accidentally want to go and see it." So he wrote back to me and he gave me the name. And then I wrote back to him and I said, we should start a podcast which says Dear Straight People. So there's a show called Dear White People on Netflix.
Dear White People, I love it.
I think we should just start a podcast called Dear Straight People. And one of the segments we should have is, "Oh, Bollywood, you've done it again." So, the unfortunate part, and this is the irony, right? Which is what I just said, is that the entertainment business is always on the cutting edge of minorities having a voice. So, for example, if you think about it, where have gay people traditionally found the jobs? The creative, right? We're creative people. So, from the beginning of time, the bohemians, all the most feminist women and the gay women and the gay men, they all found homes in the creative fields because these were the areas that it didn't matter what your sexuality was, and these are the areas that you go to a maybe not a Bollywood party, but you go to like a theater party or you go to a freaking, you'll always find the the marginalized people gravitate to jobs like this. So in one way, these areas embrace people like us. But then on another front, they do this disservice where they have these backward movies about women, backward movies about gay people, and we're in 2020. So, I was just saying that it's so unfortunate that at some level, unfortunately, they have to be so mainstream to get noticed that, like, there's a beautiful movie called Aligarh. Have you seen Aligarh? Manoj
Yes, yes,
Bajpayee.
I have.
Manoj Bajpayee was in the lead role, and I can't remember,
Yeah.
Rajkumar Rao. And that was a movie about a gay professor in Aligarh University. And it was a very touching, beautiful, moving, lovely movie, very simple, very lovely. It didn't, Hansal Mehta directed it. I think he wrote it also. It didn't probably do major box office, but that's
Yeah.
the kind of film that those are the kinds of films we should be making about people, right? Not these stereotypical, stupid. And according to Naveen, every single song in this movie was about a girl. Like, it wasn't, the love songs were not even written for a gay
Oh my God.
couple. So,
I need to really watch
yeah,
this
like,
movie.
you can't even write comedy like this.
Just
Right?
for
It's such a embarrassing, ridiculous situation. So there is
yeah.
this ironic scene where there is this irony where, on one hand, the entertainment business is so embracing of the marginalized, and on another, it does this disservice. So that's why we will have to keep fighting. That fight is not going to end.
Oh my God, yeah. That also reminds me of two things. One is another show that you wrote and you are part of. You wrote it, right? If I've read it wrong, I don't know. Shags and Fats. And I absolutely love it because and it won a Gotham. So, I mean, there is very little to debate about how do people perceive it.
Oh, that's so sweet of you.
But no, hey, listen, things that are good because right now, in times when we are also debating who speaks for whom,
Yeah.
it is supremely radical to take up an immigrant experience, take up that immigrant lens, and then look at pop culture or just how you analyze certain things around you,
Sure.
which is kind of required. But which also reminds me we need to take a short break and join right back to discuss more about so many other cultural elements we really, really need to discuss.
Hey everybody, welcome to another week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. Do definitely check out our social media accounts. We've been doing some really cool stuff over there. There are a bunch of recommendations from hosts. I think you'll really enjoy the content that we're putting out there. And make sure you don't miss your favorite shows. Cyrus Says has been putting out some great stuff, as is the Pragati podcast, all about policy, has been doing some really, really fun stuff. The guys at Football Shitball and Football Twaddle are continuing to release episodes as well, which are really interesting. Best of Anupam's been having guest after guest, just killing it. Pulia Bazi's been doing so well. Postcards from Nowhere. All these shows are really, really doing well and really, really putting out great stuff. Appreciate the efforts that the hosts are putting in the lockdown, and I hope you guys are enjoying this stuff. And with that, let's continue with the show.
So, welcome back after the really, really short break, I hope. We were talking about Shags and Fats. I'm really curious, how did it come about? Like, what is the origin story of the show?
So what it has like a way back in the past kind of origin story. So when I first started performing, when I was still working in advertising, I was in New York. I was doing a lot of improvised comedy. All of that was going great. But I also wanted to do other stuff. So I basically sent out my headshots and I thought I would do some acting. And I had no acting experience at all. But I was like, how hard can this be? Which is the stupidest thing anyone ever thought, but whatever. And I sent out my headshots, and this is all in 2004, 2005. So around that time. So post 9/11, and for whatever the reasons were, every single NYU student and anyone with a camera in New York was doing Muslim immigrant experience and a lot of short films that that was the kind of stuff I was getting called in for. Was about the Muslim experience, but it was the Muslim experience as written by people who were not Muslim. And a lot of the the roles for the women were you put the hijab on, and they didn't care if you were actually, I mean, they didn't really care where you were from so long as you had brownish skin and you kind of looked like you might be Arab slash Pakistani slash whatever. Muslim, basically Muslim. They didn't even know the difference between Arab and Pakistani. Like, they didn't even know the difference. So you looked to them, you looked Muslim. You put on a headscarf, and most of the roles didn't even have dialogue. It was just wife of da da da, aunt of so and so, mother of so and so, and you didn't even have a line of dialogue. You were like crying because your son was being arrested, or crying because your son was a terrorist, or crying because that was the roles that were out there. And of course, I mean, I'm talking about like short films, student films. I was, that was the kind of stuff I was sort of like going out for. But the thing that occurred to me, and because I was doing improvised comedy, I was doing a lot of like writing for comedic characters. So I was coming up with these characters and writing monologues and performing those. But I was also going out on these auditions. And by like the fourth or fifth audition for the same kind of thing, I remember thinking to myself, and this particular monologue just wrote itself in my head. I was on the subway, and I remember thinking, these people don't have a clue about what women from our part of the world really are like. Like, they don't even know how strong some of these chicks have to be because of what they have to deal with. And the ones who've shown up in America, okay, who are immigrants, they're even tougher. Like, just because they wear hijab and you think they can't speak the language and don't understand anything doesn't mean that they actually don't. So I ended up writing this character who was a stay-at-home mom. She was a hijabi, but she was a stay-at-home mom of 3 kids. She was married to this stupid guy, and that was the other thing. It was kind of like they made all these women so subservient to their men, which again pissed me off because I'm like, ugh, talk about like one stereotype after the other, right? So my monologue was for this Muslim woman who was a ballsy, yelling at everyone, didn't give a shit, abusive, yelled at her kids, yelled at her husband, thought everyone was stupid, like just out there character. And it was a lot of fun to perform. I did this probably in, I want to say 2005, 6, something like that, like ages ago. And then I did nothing with that character until 2012 or 13.
Wow.
Yeah, 13 or so, where MTV had like a offshoot channel called MTV Desi, and a friend of mine who was a producer, she wanted me to do something with that character because she told me, she said, every time I look at that character from way back when, I think it still hasn't become outdated. We still think of them.
I don't think it ever
It
will.
never will. Yeah, right. Exactly. So she's saying we still 10 years later think Muslim women are like this. Like, we still think that. So she said, can you come up with something and we'll do like a series? So I was at the time, I can't remember what I was hanging out with a bunch of improvisers. One of them was my co-writer on Sugars and Fats, Nadia. And I said, hey, listen, this is what she wants me to do. This is the character that it's based on. Do you want to just like riff on some stuff and, with her, and we'll come up with something. So she and I riffed. We came up with Sugars and Fats. We took it to MTV Desi. We did a bunch of things. And we even did like crazy things like being out on the street, interviews with people, asking them what they thought of us, getting these really bizarre responses. And it was just fun. It was like a fun thing to do. And I think then we did a couple of seasons, and then we caught the attention of the Gotham Awards people, and we won the award. And from there, it sort of like snowballed and became a little bit bigger. And it just ended up being this really cool thing. But I think for me, again, I didn't have an agenda when I wrote it. I was just so angry and pissed off at the time that for me, the observation was, wow, I never knew that people thought we were so, and I'm not Muslim, so when I say we, I'm talking about all women from our part of the world, but I would say Muslim women represent us strongly because, they definitely stand out because of the way they dress. A conservative Muslim woman I'm talking about, who wears hijab and who wears abaya. So you have these women who uh, are brave enough to be different, and instead of like it being a cool thing, it's been converted into this freaking stupid thing, and it's stereotyped, and it's looked down upon and shamed and all of that stuff. So I think as a woman from India, I just identified so strongly with those feelings of like, don't freaking shame me for, don't think of me in this way. So I think for me, I was just so annoyed, and then uh, it was my experience with these auditions, so that it just sort of came from that place. And again, a lot of people felt it was very much agenda driven, like, oh, it's a feminist, or oh, it's against Islamophobia. And yeah, it is all of those things. But I didn't, when I was writing it, I wasn't sitting in the subway thinking, I want to write something that's against Islamophobia, and I want to make sure that it's also feminist. That doesn't go through my mind. It was just, this is how I feel, and this is what it's going to end up being. And so, like I said, because I've been doing comedy monologues for so long, I don't have to think of the agenda. It just flows. But because I haven't been doing script writing so long, I think the agenda finding its way into the writing, and that is something I have to learn to control.
I mean, one thing that I've picked up from this is the fact that, this is kind of a reassurance of what we read in books, like how your beings are feminist in itself. Being a woman and being alive in today's times, and then being an immigrant, and then coming from a community that is marginalized to such an extent everywhere across the globe, your existence itself becomes a rebellion of sorts.
Absolutely.
And this reminds me of two things.
This. I said, don't worry about being a feminist. You are a feminist. I know you're a feminist. You know you're a feminist. You don't need to prove that to anybody. You write what you want, because what being a feminist party is also doing what you feel like.
Most definitely.
Right? So
this is so cool.
Important to remember that I'm not going to do something you want me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do, and that's being a feminist. So just do you, and everything else will fall into place. And one day you will suddenly realize that your body of work represents your feminism.
Yeah. Because it represents you in a certain sense.
Yeah, and exactly.
It just all comes to full circle.
It has to be unique. Otherwise, what's the point? And I do find myself, falling into that trap as well, which is I have to, if I'm going to write a script, it has to reflect these values that I hold so dear. And I keep thinking, even if I write, like, what does it matter? Even if I write about a pig, I mean, literally, a story about a farmhand and a pig. Like, what does it matter what I write? I am who I am. It's going to come through somehow. So it's having that confidence also is something that we all as creators have to build for ourselves. I think that's a very important thing, and it's not easy because we don't have a lot of encouraging voices around us all the time.
And also, you don't always have a suit to follow, right? I mean, with the idea of doing unique things, you're also kind of you tend to feel alone sometimes. And there's this very beautiful essay that I always keep referring to by Adrian Rich. In fact, I think I will send you an e-copy of it if you haven't read it. It talks about how, as a female creator, you're generally very, very lonely, but at the same time, very, very susceptible to criticism and to everything that comes your way, because you're kind of the unelected representative of an entire group.
Yeah.
So it's just all so weirdly twixt together.
Yeah. Please send me the essay.
Most definitely. Also, the whole abaya thing that you just spoke about, there are two offshoots that are functioning in my brain parallelly right now. One is this book I read a long time ago, not actually a long time ago, a semester ago actually. It's by Orhan Pamuk, and it's called The Snow. No, it's just called Snow. And it talks about this Turkish village where girls are committing suicide because they have a new liberal, quote unquote, dictator, and who has decided that you don't need to wear your hijab or wear your headscarves. And these girls consider the headscarves very close to their identity. So they do not want to let go of their headscarves. And that's why, as an act of rebellion, they're committing suicide, like in groups, which kind of throws off the entire society, which also kind of challenges the West's idea of equating hijab or an abaya with being marginalized. Because for some, it's also assertion of their choices. So it also takes me to this other part, which has just come around about how satire and stereotypes are used as tropes, right? So you have a lot of creators today who are, um, kind of picking up these things that you see. The reason why I find your show different than that is because there is a larger train of thought that's running behind it, as opposed to the ones I've seen online. Because um, it's also rooted very deeply in the immigrant experience. About why does the headscarf then become significant is because it is challenging the idea of the West. As opposed to when you look back home, when you look at India and how we're looking at representation, most of the times creators tend to speak over other creators who are actually talking about their truth. Do you sometimes end up on crossroads like these, and have you seen, like, how have you navigated through this space?
So, a couple of things. One is I'm not a Muslim, right? So
Right.
there was definitely okay. So now I feel like we've gone. I love everybody being as awake as they are right now, and everyone's super vigilant about stepping on marginalized communities and trying to tell other people's stories. And like the whole movement for trans actors and gay actors and stuff. I love all that. Like, I cannot bear it when you have these gay actors and trans actors and you're hiring straight people and cisgender people to play those roles. Like, why? So I'm all for the correct people telling the correct stories. Having said that, I didn't approach Shugs and Fats initially in my initial interaction with the first sketch that I wrote, as well as with the Shugs and Fats as it evolved. I never approached it as if I was telling a Muslim woman's story. For me, it was always about how immigrant, like you pointed out, b, it was to me the Muslim woman was every woman. So I almost feel like I jumped ahead a bit of almost saying, we're all Muslim women in a way, and I'm not trying to steal your culture. I'm not trying to usurp anything. It's more that I identify almost so strongly with it because it is in a way a stand-in for what so many women across the world have dealt with. I actually never looked at the abaya and hijab as something that my character wanted to take off. I actually looked at the abaya and hijab kind of like what you're saying, which is as a really important part of who these inadvertent feminists were. These were accidental feminists, if you know what I mean. It was like Shubh planned to go against the patriarchy. They never planned to be loud. They never planned to be a lot of things. They are who they are. And both of them will probably never take off their hijabs because they don't see it as oppression. They see it as part of who they are. And that's their choice as women. And so I think, and I don't even know if I'm answering a question, but I know what you're saying, where there's this, I do find Muslim women and women in general sometimes get trotted out by men a lot of the time, who aren't even often Muslim, but very often are Muslim, to make the point of feminism. We are fighting for these women, and that's why we should, we want Muslim women to have freedom. It's like, okay, that's great that you want Muslim women to have freedom, that you should firstly want all women to have freedom. But if you want Muslim women to have freedom, there are many ways of supporting them. Telling them what to wear is like telling your wife, don't wear a sleeveless top, don't wear a mini skirt. It's the same thing. You're doing the same thing. You're doing exactly what a conservative culture is doing in reverse. So I do believe, so I follow this one activist called Mona El Tawi, And Mona's like a huge advocate for the removal of the hijab. Like she's I think she's Egyptian. And she was at the Arab Spring. She was attacked. She was brutalized. She's quite a woman. And I've met Mona once or twice, and she, we've talked about sugars and fats very briefly, and so she's an advocate for women not having to wear hijab, but you can advocate for the women who want to make that choice. You can't, I feel, as a man especially, but as anybody who's not a Muslim woman, you can't, say that you will make them remove hijab. That's like saying I will make them wear hijab. So there's this line that we all have to, watch. And I think, as a creator who isn't Muslim and who doesn't wear hijab or whatever, I definitely have to consider all these things in this new day and age, And I'm glad to. I find it very odd where people are like, oh, there are these new PC people and they're all, hanging around waiting for someone to screw up. I'm like, you're just being an asshole because you can't say any old thing you feel like anymore, I actually think that, okay, there's certain things that have been taken too far, and there's a little bit of, a wokeness that maybe is too much sometimes. And there are definitely those people who are just waiting to take offense on everyone else's behalf. But it's okay. It's okay because I think some of the wokeness has resulted, like I said, in trans actors and writers being able to write their own stories and being in the mainstream and not being hidden away, or gay people being in the mainstream and not being hidden away, or more women being able to write and tell their stories as opposed to having to do the same old stupid shit written by guys. So it's the good with the bad.
I think there's a difference between being woke and being supportive of the cancel culture and just believing that growth is not something that is inherent of human capacity. Like, people do grow and we need to have that kind of a space. That being said, I love the lens that you've picked up with the show. But if you have to kind of turn it back to India, back to the East where it comes from, than just looking at the West, do you feel like you would probably be angry here if you were analyzing things back home with the same lens that Shiv and Fats do?
See, I live in India now. Okay. And I went through a phase when I came back where I was writing for the Times of India. I wrote for them. I did a bi-weekly column for almost 6 years. And one of the things they had asked me to do was look at what was going on in the news and to try and stick to, things that were actually happening day to day. And this is the thing where, once you are a feminist, you don't have to try so hard. The news that is anti-feminist just comes at you. It's almost like you can't avoid it. So I would open a newspaper, I would scroll through someone's Twitter feed or whatever it is, and the ridiculousness of how women are treated in our country would leap out at me. It was almost overwhelming how bad it was, right? Because it was everything. It was the safety of women. It was crime against women, domestic abuse. It was crime against women in offices. It was that level. Then there was the next level of pay grades. There was the next level of how few women there are in the workforce and how even fewer there are at senior levels. There was Bollywood. There was, everywhere you looked, the sexual harassment. There was so many. There was the women not being allowed into temples. There was you know what I'm saying? So there was triple talaq that was still very much part of our life. So there was so many. There was the fact that homosexuality for a long time was even, until recently, it was criminalized. So these are feminist issues that if you're a feminist, you notice them. You look at, you look at a panel. There are 8 guys, 1 token woman. It's
Yeah.
the way it is. I mean, it's sickening, but it's the way it is. I actually remember watching a film panel. Okay, like it was by this film critic. I think her name's Anupama Chopra Verma.
Yeah, are you talking about the Film Companions panel?
Yeah.
About stand-up comedy?
Yes. So
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
I remember there were everybody, Tanmay, Kannan, Biswa, like I can't remember. It was like all the guys. And Aditi Mittal was on it.
And Aditi.
And I remember
Yeah.
that Anupama asked the panel why there aren't enough women in comedy. And I remember watching it, my jaw hit the floor because I was just thinking, you curated this panel and you invited one woman. You invited one woman to the panel.
And this
How can you ask that?
and this happened in the time.
Curated the panel.
Yeah, and this happened in the time where there were women in comedy.
Of
It,
course,
like
there were plenty of
so
women in
many of them were actively
There
performing.
were, she could have, I mean, look, to be fair, she may not even have curated that panel. It may have been just someone in her office.
Yeah, like her team. Like,
But
yeah.
the point is, don't put a question like that in there if, it was weird. It was like having 6, I went for a panel. I was at some, not a lit fest, but like one of these big events, right? And I was
Yeah.
doing a 10-minute bit in between a bunch of different panels and discussions and whatnot. And there was this one that was right before me, and it was all about women in entertainment. And there were a whole bunch of actresses and this one lady who was interviewing them or whatever. And you're not even going to freaking believe this. It was so awkward. It's so embarrassing. At the end of these girls talking about their jobs, okay, as actors, they played a famous like Bollywood tune or whatever it was, and they asked these women to dance. It was like
Oh God.
like a media event. They had like big name speakers throughout the day. They had these big time panelists. Even these women, all of them had like hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter. They're like substantial women. They are actresses, but they're actors, but they're substantial people. They're not nobodies or whatever, right? You've asked them to come and talk about their industry and how
Their
things
lives.
are.
Yeah.
And then you make them dance on stage at 11:30 in the morning for your audience.
Oh God.
I mean, it was unbelievable to me. So I just think that we haven't understood how to treat women, actually. At some level,
as an industry.
As a country, we don't really
Okay,
know
yeah, that makes more sense.
how to behave around chicks, man. And the moment we it's just what it is. And so, like I said, this kind of thing, it can't. I try to turn away from it, but it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I am
And
very angry all of the time. And I actually had to go off Twitter for a whole year. 2019, I wasn't on social media. I was only on Instagram.
Wow.
Instagram was really just me following friends and people I was in awe of. And I just stayed away from it all because it's too much. And I realized that I hadn't also taken much of a break from that type of writing. And so I even stopped writing the column. I just said, guys, I need a break. I just need a year off from everything because I'm being forced to focus on this stuff. And I want to be able to read this news and not have to analyze it for a column. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like the abuse happening twice. First I read it, then I have to sit with it to write this column. It's too much for me right now. I'm not that girl. So I think the break has been great, and I'm able to a little bit more indulge debates and conversations with people who don't get it with far more patience. I'm able to look at things a little bit more calmly because I think that's going to be important to fight this war. There's no point getting angry all the time. Like, anger has to be a measured emotion and it has to be used in a constructive way, which at some point I wasn't able to do because it was too much. It was everywhere.
Yeah.
So all of us warriors have to protect ourselves so that we can continue to fight, I feel. You know what I mean? So even, or everyone. So be angry, be pissed off. I still am. I mean, if you can't tell, but I definitely think that I have to also continue to build boundaries and keep distance and let it come into my work, and not let it come into my work, come into my life, but also learn when to step back a little bit. So in terms of like feeling angry and pissed off, like you said, yeah, I still do, and I address it all the time. It's natural. It's a natural thing for me, but I have to do it in moderation.
And someone like who kind of gained their political understanding of personal and the global politics in the time when all of these movements were on a rise in the country. Right now, reading news about what happens to women in the country, just after some time you get too immune to stuff. Like if you're reading it on a constant basis, you know that this is your reality and there is very little you can do to change it. Which is why things that you read, like something as simple as 2 days, like I think it was just yesterday when I read something that a man, a kid, a woman, like actually thrashed her back because like he lost to her in a game of Ludo. And this is going around, like the case of domestic violence is just going around on your social media circles as if it's like an everyday happenstance, as if this is not something that should actually like be questioned as a society. And then you see, like, this is why something like I feel like the artists who are kind of up and coming and kind of are trying to get to positions where they can control stuff around them, they should actually try to do better in terms of understanding how your even curation works for that matter, like you just spoke about. Like, even if it was, say, an intern putting a panel together, they need to be trained how to be a little more sensitive towards these biases. Like, I don't know if I'm expecting too utopian out of the universe when I'm saying all of this.
We must expect. We must. I actually always, I'm always told, oh, that's an ideal situation. I'm like, and why should I want less than what's ideal for women? Like, why?
Yeah.
Why should I be okay with the substandard rubbish that's been barely getting better? Why should I be okay with that? I think it's okay to expect the ideal and fight for it and push for it, and to remember it when you're in a position where you can choose a panel. Or, I had a conversation recently with a woman who was putting a panel together. She called me up. Firstly, she called me up at the last minute, I could tell. And the week before the panel, and she's like, we're talking about comedy and we would really love to have a woman on the panel. I almost choked. And then she said, because, we already have two men. We have so-and-so and so-and-so. And it'd be really nice to round off with a woman. So I said, I would love the day when someone calls me and says, hey, we have two women on the panel and we're looking for a male comedian. Do you know, just a man? We should just have a man on the panel to round it off. Like, that would be amazing. And I was very blunt with her. I said, you're a woman. You should, you should be thinking about these things. And she was really embarrassed, as she should be. And then I recommended 2 or 3 of my comedian friends who live in the city because I didn't want to travel for this rubbish, who live in the city for where she was. Because I said, at least somebody who's there might be able to get something out of it. Because I told her no one's going to travel for this at the last minute, like people are busy. And I can't remember what happened. I think even I wonder if it even got cancelled because of this whole coronavirus thing. But anyway, the point is, call it out whenever you can. And just bear it in mind. But these are unconscious biases, like you said, the film companion panel, I think it was unconsciously put together. People go through life without thinking about stuff. And it takes very special types of people to really stretch and bother about it. Um, yeah,
I think we need more of those special kind of people on this planet, literally.
I know. I completely agree.
Like, as much as I will sound biased right now, but I don't really care about it. The best conversations I've had on this podcast are with women. And at some point, I realized, like, as in when you train yourself into this entire act of looking at your own decisions, because sometimes as people, we say and we do stuff that we don't really mean, and then we look back at it in retrospect. But like we said, like you know, you don't always think about an agenda when you sit down to write. It just almost comes to you naturally. I think there should be a point in time like where a lot of people who have a lot of power in the culture, for them also it should come very naturally to have a balanced perspective. Like, why just go for the binaries? Talk about people who are from the marginal communities and also have a voice and are actively performing right next to you. You don't have to really look that far, especially in a city like Mumbai, where you have like one poet, one artist, one stand-up comedian all living on the same floor, like in every third Andheri building. It's not that
Totally.
difficult.
No, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I definitely, as I get older as well, I find that I tire easily of, firstly, guys my age are another league, but I'm not interested so much in, you know, even shows that don't have a lead female. I can't watch them anymore.
Yeah.
It's becoming harder and harder for me. So my husband and I have completely separate viewing habits. And in fact, the other day, we bring this up with each other a lot because I remember when Orange is the New Black um, came out and Transparent came
Yeah.
out and a whole bunch of these, shows that have trans or heavy female casts or are made by women creators. Uh, I recommended. I said, "Oh my God, you are going to freaking love Orange is the New Black. Like it's amazing." And I remember he got through one or two episodes and he was like, "I can't watch it." I'm like, "Why?" And he said, "If I have to be completely honest, it's because it's about women." And I hate to freaking have to tell you this, but I think that's the reason. Like, I actually think that is my reason for not watching it. And I'm like, at least you're being honest because I think the truth is
Yeah.
men can't get around to watching stuff about women. They're not interested. Whereas we, as a gender, are very interested in all kinds of different things. So we grew up watching stuff about guys. And I watched
Yeah.
tons of comedy movies and shows where the lead characters were men. And I remember Friends. I didn't care. I hate to say this, but I didn't care for Seinfeld that much because it was three men and one female. And I think that's the reason I never got into Seinfeld, even though it's a very smart show. Um, I I remember Friends, which again isn't my scene exactly, but there was something about it
Yeah.
being evenly distributed, like three men and three women. And the reason is because the writer and the creator is a freaking woman.
Yeah.
She's the same woman who's
I
written
think the lens kind of
Breaking
changes completely.
Bad. The
Like, you can
moment,
tell when a show is being written by
yeah,
women.
isn't it? And even though I never
Yeah.
Friends are like it felt a little bit like it's not exactly what I'm not. It's not exactly a show I'm into, but I got into it, and then I realized much later that of all these stupid sitcoms, it was one of the few that was written by a woman, and that's why it had
Yeah.
so many strong female characters that weren't just sexy, stupid stand-ins for the love interest. You know,
Yeah.
um, they were meaningful, well written, rounded characters. And as I've got older, I've seeked that out more and more. And I'm glad that more and more it's being created. There are more women creators out there. And I just think that's important to watch and look out for. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying I don't enjoy stuff by male creators. In fact, I gave a list of stuff recently to somebody, and I'm sure that both the shows. I mean, Ricky Gervais definitely like his show was definitely made by him, but even the other show, I have a feeling was probably like created by a guy. There were a lot of female writers or whatever, but it wasn't. I wasn't thinking about those just happened to be the shows I was watching at the time. So it's not that I don't like
Yeah.
I'm only going to watch anything written by a man. But it's just interesting to me that as a woman, I can do both. But men, not all of them can say, oh, I want to watch Better Things because it's about the single mom and it sounds like it'd be really cool. I don't
I get
understand that.
In fact, I read this one Tumblr post which compared how like it was super amusing because Tumblr can be like a really weird place where you can find really good gems at times. So it spoke about how Birds of Prey, the Harley Quinn movie, and how Suicide Squad both look at Harley Quinn in very different lights. So in Suicide Squad, she's super sexualized. It's always like the camera is always looking at her in this very sultry angle of making her look like the bad girl. And in Birds of Prey, she's just genuinely shown having fun. And I didn't realize that it is like, then I realized that the director is female, so that lens completely changed as to how is she looking at another woman's idea of being a rebel.
Yeah.
And it's just super amusing because even when you see a comparison as to say when a Lipstick Under My Burqa is written and directed, as any other shows which remotely touch upon the idea of female sexuality in our country, it's just a complete spectrum, like from good to bad, a complete spectrum of things.
Oh, absolutely.
And I feel like somewhere, yeah, you were saying.
No, I was just going to say, because you said Lipstick Under My Burqa, the same writer, she didn't create it, but she wrote the show Made in Heaven with Rima and Zoya. And I think did she direct any of the episodes? I can't remember, but she wrote the show. And again, it's really interesting because the lead characters of that show are a man who's gay and a straight woman. And for once, there's a representation of a gay man in such a positive, sensible, realistic. That's how gay men are. And this woman is not annoying. Like, she's not an annoying lead character. So again, the female lens so important, you know.
That being said, this has been such a wonderful discussion. Like, somewhere I feel like people like you have kind of paved a way to question all of these things because you are somebody like I literally like I read Unladylike and then I used to watch a comedy on YouTube. Then I stumbled upon one episode of Shigs and Fats and I was like, this is amazing. And then I met you at the Lit Fest and I feel like in the last 4 to 5 years in which I've been consuming your content, I have kind of grown as like a person in various sense. Like I've been influenced by a lot of stuff. But I feel like somewhere it's people like you who've always been at the back of my mind when I look at certain elements of culture. And when people say like, oh, there are not enough women in comedy, I now have a proper list I can throw at their faces. And I'm like, hey guys, listen, do your research better. And I'm so grateful that you all stood your ground. You kind of paved the way for a lot of people who followed. And it's really, really amazing.
Oh, thank you for doing so much. It was so nice. And then thank you for having me on your podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you.
Same here. Like, I didn't even realize, like, we've spoken for so long. It just felt like, oh, we just started 15 minutes ago. That. Yeah, it was really, really so much fun. I cannot wait to see you soon.
Yeah, after the lockdown, hopefully, when you but read lots of books and keep thinking all the thoughts that you've been having. And put stuff out there like you're doing, you know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really means a lot to me. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Laxmi. Thank you so much.
Entertainment is like food for the brain. It's a window to culture and a great way to understand the world around us. The internet has changed what it means to be an entertainer, creating new storytellers with millions of fans. It has spawned a new breed, the story sellers, those behind the scenes creating the business for this ecosystem. They work with brands, platforms and channels who are keen to capitalize on an audience hungrier than ever for more stories. I'm Vineet Kanabar and I have a ringside view to how stories are told and sold. On my show, I bring you creators, artists, executives and marketers for a freewheeling conversation around the business of entertainment. Tune in to Storytellers and Story Sellers for personal stories, analysis and criticism every Thursdays as I talk to the brightest minds telling or selling great stories today.
Do you have a night routine? Well, everyone has one. And the to-do list usually looks like this. Brush your teeth, set that alarm, get into your pajamas, and switch off those screens. But here's one more to add to that list. Tune into the Positively Unlimited podcast for a dose of positive action and tips on how to build powerful mindsets. Episodes out every Monday on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you tune into podcasts.